Hey everyone, Brayden here coming to you with a breaking Disney news update where today we are going to be diving in to Disney's fiscal year 2023 Q1 earnings report, which was released yesterday. I listened to the entire earnings call, and this one was a little extra visceral for me because as this was all unfolding, I was actually in line with cast members, hundreds of them, at a cast member preview of Tron Light Cycle Run at Walt Disney World. As you probably saw on Monday, I was able to make it out to Tron. I really wanted to check the area out at night though, and thanks to another awesome viewer, I was able to go last night and check it out. There was a pretty big wait for the actual attraction, and I wanted to get footage where there's not a lot of people, in the area where you can really take it all in at night. So I waited around quite a while, but in the end, I was able to capture some absolutely incredible footage for you guys of the area empty at night. But that's for the next video, so make sure you're subscribed with those notifications on so you don't miss any of that. So as I was at the Magic Kingdom with all these cast members, the CEO of the company, Bob Iger, sent out a company-wide email to cast members announcing 7,000 job cuts and providing no further detail. And then the cast members, they were getting texts from their parents. I saw it on the news, Disney's cutting 7,000 jobs. And they're like, yes, mom, I know, stop stressing me out. I have to say, we talk about these stories a lot, the financials at Disney and the, inner workings and all this sort of stuff. But there is something more real about it this time. I'm among all these people, I'm talking to these people that these news stories we talk about most directly affect. We're talking about people's livelihoods here. It's definitely a pretty wild situation, and I will definitely be leveling my fair share of critiques Disney's way here, but I think it's also very easy to get carried away. So what I'm going to try to do here is give you guys a very good perspective on all of this, what's happening, why it's happening. So first off, we've got a new sheriff in town, a returning sheriff. As you all probably know, Chapek is out and Bob Iger is back. This was his first earnings call in quite a while. As you've probably heard, lots of big companies right now are announcing job cuts. This is due to a number of factors. There's earnings contraction starting to happen, as we've seen with a lot of these Q1 reports. You're hearing people say stuff about macroeconomics and things like this. Essentially, the deal is at these growth companies that rely heavily on borrowing money, debt is becoming more and more expensive, the rates are higher, and corresponding with this, as we've entered this more uncertain economic environment, there has been a shift on the part of investors and Wall Street where the focus is less and less on growth at all costs, like what's Disney Plus subscriber count, and that's the only thing that matters, and there's more of a focus on profitability. So is Disney Plus making money? And we know the answer is no, it isn't. And as I said, this isn't unique to Disney. A lot of big companies are announcing big cuts, and at a lot of these tech companies in particular, I think this makes a lot of sense. You're seeing at Google, they're laying off recruiters and their corporate massage therapists, things like this. In a tightening economic environment, it makes a lot of sense to get rid of positions like that. The difference is Disney isn't Google. Disney likes to act like a tech company. They're not a tech company. And Disney here, they're announcing 7,000 job cuts. And we heard today, these won't just be affecting the studios, they'll be affecting all segments of the company, including the parks, according to Parks Chairman Josh D'Amaro, which is just incredible because here is a company where on the studio side, a lot of these folks that you see in the credits, they aren't even directly employed by Disney. Lots of the content you see come out of Hollywood, it's people who work project to project all over Hollywood. And then you have Disney's networks, that make all of the television and stuff. A lot of those networks, the crews have been skeleton crews for a long time now. They already are operating, at their bare minimum staffing levels. And then of course, we know on the park side, you have lots of demand, a lot of people who want to go to the parks, lots of people who love the parks, yet Disney can't find enough people to work at the parks for the prices that they're willing to pay. They are understaffed as is, and they are currently embroiled in a battle with the unions over wage increases. And we're coming out of the Chapek era, which we should also mention. Bob Chapek, he didn't just cut the fat, he also cut positions that I would classify as essential on a medium to long-term time horizon. Something like maintenance, cutting maintenance positions. Maybe that improves your margins a fraction of a percent in the near term. Long term, that is obviously a very poor decision and will end up costing you more later on. And then after all of this, here we get Iger back, and what do we hear? It's more the same. We're still getting layoffs, more layoffs. I really feel like we are past any fat in the company labor-wise. I really think Disney is starting to cut into the organs at this point, where they're going to have to shut down areas that they operate in simply because there aren't enough cast left to even keep some of these things and these services that Disney provides going, because they're already operating as skeleton crews. And here Disney is now trying to find 7,000 people to lay off in a show to investors, in a show to Wall Street. And maybe it's not just a show, maybe they also have to do this because they have all of these financial obligations with the Fox acquisition and other beasts which are of Iger's creation. So it's just some wild, wild stuff. Another bit of context with this earnings report in particular, this is the last big shareholder event before the shareholders vote as part of the next annual shareholders meeting, which we now know will take place on April 3rd. And as I covered in extensive detail last month, you have this proxy fight which has been going on where Nelson Peltz has been campaigning to become a board member and put out this big presentation highlighting all the areas of concern that we've discussed for years and years. You know, Disney's still suffering from Iger's 2018 acquisition of 21st Century Fox. There's been poor succession planning at Disney, and the board seems to not have much of a clue, and everyone on the board has a lot of other obligations elsewhere where they're really not focused on Disney. The dividend went away for shareholders. The parks are nickel and diming their hardest core fans, which they can't easily replace, and on. All these things were pointed out by Peltz. So during this earnings call that Iger did, while not directly referencing Peltz, Iger touched on many of the issues that his opponent pointed out. And chief among these was Iger announcing that they are going to aim to bring back the dividend by the end of the year. They say it'll be a very small dividend to start, but that it will grow in time. And to further rebuke Peltz's points, I think, Disney released their own slide deck along with this earnings report, a presentation highlighting Disney's future roadmap, what their goals are, what their plans are, attempting to address the concerns that the proxy fight has raised. And not less than 24 hours after the earnings were released, Nelson Peltz called into CNBC and announced, well, listen to this.
Management at Disney now plans to do everything that we wanted them to do. We will be watching, we will be rooting, and the proxy fight is over.
So it looks like that's that. It looks like the Disney War 2.0 is coming to a very premature end here as a result of Iger coming out and addressing some of Peltz's concerns, particularly on the dividend front, as well as some of the perceived excesses in spending with this announcement of big job cuts and other operational cuts. In response to these announcements of layoffs, cuts, and attempts to reinstate the dividend, Disney stock opened the day up 5%, but it quickly came back down to earth and finished the day in the red. So the earnings pump, it was sold off pretty hard. They went down over 6% intraday. That said, for the year, Disney is still performing quite well insofar as their stock is concerned, but this is mostly due to a broad pump in the markets, which has been relentless since 2023 began. So I think we have all the big stuff surrounding these earnings out of the way. You have the proxy war, which is now over. 7,000 cast members will be losing their jobs amidst a staffing shortage, which just sounds unbelievable, and maybe the dividend will be returning before the end of the year. Now getting to the numbers, Disney beat on EPS expectations as well as on revenue, but Disney Plus lost 2.4 million subscribers. At the studios, Disney had some underwhelming theatrical releases that did not meet Disney's earnings projections. At the parks though, you guys probably know how they did. They absolutely crushed. Revenues were up 21% to $8.7 billion, and segment operating income increased 25% to $3.1 billion. Disney's just making stupid money at the parks, thanks to a lot of us. So now getting to the call, and this is where we start to take a look at some of the contradictions that are present in this earnings release, in this earnings call. So you just heard me say that the studios underperformed. They're up 1% year over year. Meanwhile, the parks are up 21% year over year. They are Disney's strong suit where there's a lot of demand, a lot of interest. Well, then we get the earnings call, and CFO Christine McCarthy, she announces that they are going to be cutting their capital expenditure this year, their projections for the year, by $700 million. So where will they be investing less money this year than they initially anticipated? You can probably guess, but hear it from the horse's mouth.
Fiscal 2023 capital expenditures will total approximately $6 billion. This is lower than our prior guide of $6.7 billion, primarily due to decreases in CapEx at our domestic parks, reflecting in part some timing shifts.
So as per usual, where will Disney be cutting spending? at their domestic parks, at their strongest performer with the best demand. And I will say this is something that Disney's done for a long time. It is their investment strategy. They tend to focus their spending on the underperformers where they aren't making money. But if you ever wonder why we have so little in the pipeline in terms of new things coming to the domestic parks, there you go. That's why. Then, contradicting what the CFO just said, Iger mentions how great it is for Disney to invest big in their domestic parks with things like Galaxy's Edge and Avatar. And he even teases some kind of Avatar experience perhaps coming to Disneyland, and also seems to reference plans that Josh D'Amaro is working on with the Imagineers over at the Animal Kingdom, the additions that they're doing over there. He doesn't specifically say the Animal Kingdom, but it sounds like he's referencing what was talked about at the last D23.
We have learned that when we invest in increasing capacity, the Star Wars lands would be a good example of that. Pandora was a great example of that. We can grow our business. In fact, if you look at the results when we put Pandora at Animal Kingdom, from year to year, they were stunning in terms of how many more people visited Animal Kingdom. I mentioned on the call that we're going to bring a version of Avatar to Disneyland. We have other opportunities as well. I've talked to Josh D'Amaro about this very recently, like this morning, again, to really look at all the great franchises of the company and see where we can invest in them in the parks to increase capacity while preserving guest satisfaction.
So those were the clips from the earnings call I thought were worth highlighting. I'll tell you guys, I think I've looked at this all quite critically so far, but I will say I do think Iger is a big improvement over Chapek in many regards. I think under Iger, we will see more capital expenditure come to the domestic parks than we would have seen under Chapek. Whether it'll be a big difference, I kind of doubt it. I think there's financial limitations limiting Disney's ability to invest in the parks because of what we talked about with the Fox acquisition, Disney's obsession with Disney Plus and so on, which they consider the future of their business, not the parks. They do not believe the parks are the future of their business. Although in this call, Iger then contradicts that and says that he's bullish on the parks. So it's all very conflicting. It's like they're saying one thing, but they're doing another. Some headlines I saw framed this earnings call very well. They said Iger begins cleaning up his own mistakes, which is definitely a very good way to put it, because while Chapek made a lot of errors and made new messes that Iger's gonna have to deal with, a lot of the headwinds that Chapek faced and now Iger is facing here are of Iger's creation back when he was previously CEO with things like the Fox acquisition. And on the topic of the Fox acquisition, I think Iger knows there's a lot of criticism out there of it because he was very defensive of the Fox acquisition and brought it up several times throughout the call. It felt like he kept bringing it up over and over again, how The Simpsons on Disney Plus is doing so well and how they have a larger content library and it's all thanks to Fox and things like this. I think it's all quite interesting because there is a lack of ability for Disney to actually point to much tangible in terms of how the Fox acquisition has materially benefited the company. It really seemed like what Iger was doing in the earnings call when he kept bringing up Fox is he was trying to rationalize, trying to justify something that is a component of their current predicament where Disney is being forced to lay off cast members amidst a shortage of cast members. Meanwhile, their competitor Universal just announced they are hiring over 2,500 new positions as of right now. That's just Universal Orlando alone that announced that they have 2,500 new positions that they are looking to fill. I just filmed our next Epic Universe update. The pace of work over there, it is absolutely incredible. The excitement is palpable. And from what I've heard from sources about the leadership over at NBC Universal Comcast, who's responsible for all of this, they are fans of their parks. They love the parks and they see growth there outside of the next few quarters, which I think explains a lot of the difference we see. Whereas over at Disney, we know the leadership doesn't see the parks in the same way. It seems like often they talk about the parks in terms of something to exploit, and at the same time that they're exploiting it, they're looking at ways to cut back in spending on it in any way that they can, as you just heard the CFO say with cutting CapEx at the domestic parks. And she's also said many other things on these earnings calls. We're going to cut portion sizes. The park reservations are so great. We're limiting annual passes, all these sorts of things. None of this is conjecture. What we're saying is all stuff that has been said by these executives. If you listen close, we know what their attitude is insofar as the parks are concerned. If you're looking for a little bit of positivity in all this, I will say Iger's been very focused on fixing the studio side of the business the last few months. It seems like that's where a lot of his focus is, talking to all the people at the studios, reorganizing it, the content distribution stuff that Chapek switched up. Iger was not a fan of that. Iger's talking about transforming the business, trying to make Disney Plus successful. That's definitely where a lot of his focus is. All this is to say, I really feel like Iger hasn't had time yet to really sink his teeth into the situation at the parks. So all this is to say, some of the things that we're still seeing that are really bad, like the continued de-theming of the resort hotels and the lack of capital expenditure we're seeing from the CFO and so on, a lot of these things are vestiges of the Chapek era, and those business practices, they're things that Iger may have time to address in the future and may be looking to address, and he did express some interest in that direction during this earnings call, although the actions we're seeing Disney take and what the CFO was talking about with cutting spending at the parks reflect very much the opposite of what Iger was saying that he wanted to do moving forward. So that's about all I have for you guys today. I hope I was able to shed some light on the latest happening here, why things are unfolding the way that they are, what the motivations are, as well as what we're actually seeing happen here. There's a lot more to talk about, don't get me wrong. We've got Tron, we've got the Reedy Creek situation, which there have been some developments on. We've also got the latest progress on Epic Universe. We also got Disney over at the Magic Kingdom ripping up Splash Mountain. Work is ramping up on that right now. They just got rid of some more of the Splash Mountain signage. So much to get to, so make sure you're subscribed with those notifications on. Thank you so much for watching. From the Mickey V's Magic Studio, this is Brayden. Have a magical day.